Welcome back everyone to another video on the Vixen Victory channel. Today we're going to be talking about Kazuha, and I'm going to try to do this a little bit more often, go over the two 5-star characters that are on the banners for tips guide, build guides, kind of because people are going to be pulling the characters on the banners obviously. So although we are going through the character archive normally and going from the most recent characters down to the oldest characters, I do want to jump, I guess, back into getting, because I know a lot of people are going to be going after the characters that are in this main sense of kind of the idea of going into these characters. So I will probably try to be doing that a little bit more often. I'll be doing the same thing with Kanish and Raiden as well. Obviously, the new characters like Kanish and Mualani, I'll obviously be doing those because they're at the top of the character archive. But those older characters that are getting reruns, I'll be doing those as well, as long as I obviously haven't done a build guide on them already. So with Kazuha, let's go ahead and jump right into him as a character. One of my favorite characters, and honestly one of the best supports the game has to offer, based on a passive talent he has, as well as his great usefulness in a 4-piece Viridescent Venerer set, as well as he's very easy to build based off high elemental mastery and a good amount of energy recharge as well. Also, never mind, also some pretty good constellations that he can grab as well. But looking at some, passives or mainly just looking at the skills and the burst and the normal attack talent, just the talents on what you should focus on when you're looking at how should I be building him and how should I be leveling talents. The first thing to focus on is going to be your skill and your burst. I think keeping these very similar in levels can be great. Personally, for me, I've leveled the most into the burst just because I like that damage a little bit more. But for me as well, I would even say if you like to do with Kazuha, he does a skill and then it also changes into a normal attack, which is called Madare Ranzan, which we'll get into in a second. That is based off of plunging attack damage, which means that you could level into the normal attack talent like I have to get just more personal damage for Kazuha. With most of my supports, I try to level even into the things that just do straight damage with them because I think it overall helps the team with overall damage. So I like to have my supports do as much damage as they physically can while I'm focusing mainly on giving buffs to the team. So although Kazuha isn't built for damage 90% of the time, you really do want to give him a little bit of a chance to actually do some good damage to overall just help your team do a lot more damage in the major sense of your team. Now let's go ahead and jump and look at his skill. Basically, Kazuha will lift himself in the air while also pulling opponents into him, kind of creating a little bit of a pull effect. And then also, while he's in the air, he actually gets the ability, over the span of 10 seconds, he can then use a plunging attack, which will then be counted and known as Madare Ranzan. So, while using your skill, you can either just tap, and there's a tap and a hold version. It had a little pull effect as you saw, which is very nice and neat to know. Obviously, I'll show you that again. Just a very nice little pull together of enemies. But afterwards, as you saw, while Kazuha was in the air, he actually had a little bit of animal already on him. And at that point, that's when you can use your Madare Ranzan. So you can see some animal around him, do a plunging attack, and this creates a little vortex as well. Helps for kind of more consistent pulling enemies together, allowing for your other DPSs to switch on field or whatever to then do big amounts of damage, or just switch to your other supports to kind of group them, keep them together to make sure that they're all either getting frozen or they're getting the reactions hit on them, to make sure that they're all getting the damage hit all together. He's very good for grouping as well as just the buffs that he can give. And although he's not someone like Kazuha who has an even better pulling ability, I think he has one of the best in the game, so it is pretty good to know that he has that. And it's just another reason why he's such a great support character. But looking further, obviously, there is a hold version, which has a larger AoE when you're at the bottom of holding the skill, and at that point in time, we'll make sure to grab multiple enemies as well, and I'll show you that as well. The normal version is kind of a small area, but as soon as you hold, it's a bigger area, and you can still do the Madare Ranzan after that as well, which is nice to know because those two don't really change too much when looking at the skill. And obviously, the original damage is going to be lower as well as the cooldown, so you have to wait a little bit longer to use the skill if you do the hold version. But honestly, with the setups and the teams that Kazuha uses, it should be a very long time until you come back to Kazuha, so you'll always have the cooldown ready, or you'll always have the skill ready, because no matter which cooldown you use, you should have the skill ready for the next rotation. Now, looking a little bit further into Kazuha's burst, everything here is just personal damage. His skills and his bursts and his normal attacks in and of themselves in the actual talent info does not actually help other characters. It is all personal damage, but through the mechanics that they use, the passive talents kind of use them to give characters other buffs. So Overall, though, for leveling sake, you don't have to level into these. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't. I'm just saying you don't have to because his buffs don't necessarily bank on them. Now, should you level into them? Yes, I think that getting into the skill and the burst is a good idea, and I do believe that leveling into the normal attack is nice as well. Obviously, like I said before, making sure your supports do as much damage as possible. Doing that Midari Ranzan's nice because sitting up in the air using your skill and then just kind of waiting for yourself to kind of fall down just kind of seems like a waste of time. And you're just kind of waiting, you might as well just do the Midari Ranzan, do some extra damage, and get back on the ground as soon as possible. It may save an extra second, but sometimes, obviously, with Abyss and whatnot, for people who are trying to clear it and are having some issues, sometimes even the 1 second help clears help, somewhere along the line. So, still very helpful. Also just helps with faster clears and a little bit more fun damage as well through a character like him. Now, looking at the burst, also actually going back to the Midari Ranzan, that plunging attack, it is considered plunging attack damage right here. And that is why I leveled into the normal attack, really for no other reason that I did that. It's purely just for the Midari Ranzan to do more damage. Now, looking at the burst, Kazuha will then create an huge AoE animo field called the Autumn Wind, and at this point in time, he'll do a huge AoE animo slash originally, and then it will create this Autumn Whirlwind kind of area, and at that point in time, he'll do periodic bits of AoE animo damage, and if he comes into contact with any Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, or Electro, the 4 swirlable elements, he'll do an additional bit of damage, as well as the animo damage as well. So, obviously, and as well, you can't swirl multiple of the elements at once, it can only be one, and you'll see a very physical change of the elements. If you do the burst, it'll kind of just show an animo if it doesn't come into contact with anything. A light blue for, Cryo, a purple for Electro, a darker blue for Hydro, and then obviously red for Pyro. It's very easy to see, a very nice and easy way to know what you've swirled through your burst. Also looking at Kazuha, the initial slashing damage that he does, that first initial hit while using the burst, is going to be very, very high. And the damage over time, the DOT, is going to be those bits of animo hits that he does over a period of time. And then if he does swirl an element as well, the additional elemental damage here will change that as well and do a little bit more damage with the element that he swirled. So once again, this is the first animo hit. The DOT is the periodic animo hits over time. And combined with the periodic animo hits, if he swirls an element, it'll do an additional little bit of damage from whatever element he swirled, personally from him. Now, looking at some passive talents, the first passive talent is kind of just more, once again, personal damage. It just helps a Midari Ranzan absorb the element of Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, or Electro. If he swirls any of those elements, he'll do more damage based off of his attack in that damage sense. So if you kind of swirl Pyro, which I believe there is a little cook here thing here, and I'll just light it on fire. But basically for Kazuha, as you saw earlier, if I just use the skill, it's just an animo kind of swirl. There's nothing really special about it. But if you come into contact with Pyro as well, you can actually see it. I kind of have red around me, and then I do a Pyro attack back, which actually lit that fire back as well. So that's kind of the idea with Kazuha. With that first passive talent, it's just helping him pick up these different elements to then do more damage as well. Once again, more personal damage, but the second passive talent kind of goes further into helping his supportive capabilities. Upon triggering a swirl reaction, Kazuha will grant all party members a 0.04% elemental damage bonus to the element swirled by swirl for every point of elemental mastery Kazuha has for 8 seconds. In a very basic sense of this, whatever element you swirl with Kazuha, whether it's through the skill or the burst, based on his elemental mastery, he'll give an elemental damage bonus to every party member, including himself, based on the element that he swirled. So if you swirl, if I put down a Bennett burst and put down a Kazuha burst and it swirls that Pyro, then I will get, based off my elemental mastery, I'll give the entire party an elemental damage bonus of Pyro, giving them a Pyro elemental damage bonus, which obviously in this team is going to be very good considering I use Kazuha as my main damage dealer. So that's kind of the biggest thing, and that's why he works so well based off of that second passive talent, as well as we'll get into an artifact set in a minute. But that's why at the beginning, though, I said that he goes so heavily into elemental mastery and then energy recharge as well, because when we're looking at weapons and artifacts, that's where you're mainly going to want to focus into is elemental mastery and then energy recharge. And even still, with Kazuha, he's not really very high in his energy needs, but it's nice to have it as well, and the burst isn't super necessary until you get to that C2, which the C1 helps out with. But looking at some weapons for Kazuha, obviously, like I've stated before, Elemental Mastery is going to be his bread and butter, the only thing in my personal opinion you're going to want to go for. I know you can use an energy recharge weapon, and if you don't have an Elemental Mastery weapon, then obviously you can use, obviously looking at Kazuha, you could use an energy recharge weapon, but you're just going to lose a lot of that passive talent bonus that he gives based on it, which is just going to be a lot more hurt for your DPS because it's more, once again, just getting that burst is more personal damage either way. So in my personal opinion, I do think that it's not that great. So try to find an Elemental Mastery main stat weapon. Obviously, his best weapon is going to be his personal weapon, Freedom Sworn. Never mind the extra buffs that it gives, as well as the high amount of Elemental Mastery. It's just a great weapon for him. Obviously, personal damage, as just giving a higher basic attack, helping out with a lot more of Elemental Mastery, helping out with that passive talent, then giving a huge buff with the Millennial Movement stacks to other characters. Obviously, everything we know that the personal weapon for the character is going to be their best in slot. So we're going to skip this weapon. This should be, if you have it, this should be on Kazuha. But a second weapon you could use is Xiphos' Moonlight. Now, Xiphos' Moonlight is much like the Iron Sting. At level 90, it gives 510 base attack, and at level 90 as well, it gives 165 Elemental Mastery, which 165 Elemental Mastery is the same thing that you get from Iron Sting, so these two weapons are very comparable. The reason why everyone likes Xiphos' Moonlight a little bit more than Iron Sting is because the amount of energy recharge that you can get from the passive talent, which is based off of the character's Elemental Mastery already. And obviously, as we know, getting the burst back can be very helpful for more swirl reactions as well as personal damage, allowing to trigger, if you don't have your skill ready, it allows to trigger the passive talent of swirling a little bit better. So there's a lot of things that can come with using this second, kind of ability here through that second passive talent with this specific weapon. And that's why a lot of people like it. Sadly, I have yet to actually get one. And this is based off of kind of just your luck on the weapon banners, getting this weapon through that sense. But if you're like me and have yet to get one like that through that way, you guys can go ahead and get the kind of craftable free-to-play weapon, which is Iron Sting. Once again, same amount of Elemental Mastery at level 90. I do really like it because it does help, once again, with personal damage, and that is pretty helpful over time. It does help your Kazuha do more damage, which, once again, does help. I think it's a second backup to Xiphos' Moonlight, so I do think that this is pretty good. I do like the Elemental Mastery weapons more than I like the Energy Recharge weapons, as I've already stated before, through them as well. Now, over time as well, more refinements could be better, but obviously some other characters might want them as well because they might use them for other reasons, like Kuki. So keep that in mind as you're going to be running that. Now, another weapon you could use is Tokubo Shigure. This is an event weapon, I believe, as well. 165 Elemental Mastery, 510 base attack, same stats as the other two 4-star weapons. This is going to help with more personal damage. The character wielding this weapon will get 32% more damage if you can trigger the Cursed Parasol, which, as long as you hit an opponent, they'll get Cursed Parasol on them, so you'll personally do more damage with Kazuha to that opponent. But once again, this is kind of more specific, and it's really not that great of a weapon. The ability isn't as good, in my personal opinion, as the other two. Obviously, Xiphos is at the top of the 4 stars. Backing that up is going to be Iron Sting, and behind that is Tokubo Shigure. Now, looking at energy recharge weapons, because if you're like, look, I really don't have any Elemental Mastery weapons, and I don't have any belays to actually create the Iron Sting, or I just don't have the ability to, or I've kind of used it up on my Kuki and I don't want to put on my Kazuha, is there anything else I can use? Well, I think the backup to all of those weapons is going to be something like Favonia's Sword. It's more helpful with energy recharge with a lot of it, which allows you to only focus into Elemental Mastery on your substats and main stats in the actual artifacts kind of idea. So you don't have to worry about energy recharge at all if you get this weapon. This does help with that, so if you want to get this for your Kazuha, I can understand, as long as you can make up a lot of the extra loss in Elemental Mastery in your artifacts. But still, I do believe that the other Elemental Mastery swords are going to be better. And I know some people even bring up using Sacrificial or something like that if you don't have Favonius. Yes, but once again, you're kind of falling down and down the spiral of just getting into worse and worse weapons. I do think, once again, trying to make sure you get yourself an Elemental Mastery weapon is going to be best, and it's pretty easy to do with free-to-play options like this, as well as the event weapon we got not too long ago, back, I believe, actually in Inazuma. So it's actually been a little while since then. So if you do have this weapon, go ahead and use it if you don't have Iron Sting or Xiphos' Moonlight or his personal weapon. Now, looking beyond weapons, because it's pretty easy looking at that sense, for Kazuha, you should be going nowhere else for personal sets besides Viridescent Venerer. The 4-piece is extremely great. You don't really care too much about the 2-piece, although it does help with personal damage for Kazuha. The 4-piece increases swirl damage by 60%, which is nice, but majorly the whole point of that 4-piece is decreasing the opponent's elemental resistance to the element infused by swirl by 40%. And obviously, you're swirling already with that second passive talent, giving an elemental damage buff to your characters. And then, as well as you're swirling at the same time with the 4-piece Viridescent, you're decreasing elemental resistance to opponents based on the element that you swirled. So if you swirl Pyro for Arlecchino here, then you're giving her a buff. But you're also, with the 4-piece Viridescent, giving an enemy a debuff, which is basically doubling the amount of damage even more that you could do with, your DPS character if you can swirl the element that they use. Just another reason why Viridescent is extremely good. I know people are going to talk about a 4-piece, instructor set, and if you kind of do have that, then yes. And if you don't have the ability to grind the 5-star artifacts, you can go for the 4-piece instructor set if you have some good pieces on it and you do have all main stat elemental mastery on them. It is nice because the 2-piece gives elemental mastery, and the 4-piece states that upon triggering an elemental reaction, it increases all party members' elemental mastery by 120 for 8 seconds. It is nice, it is useful, but 4-piece Viridescent at the end of the day does blow it out of the water, so you can use it in the meantime, but try to grind out this 4-piece set. And even if you really want to, you could grind out, or just get, while you're grinding this set out, go ahead and grab 2-piece elemental mastery to just spike his personal elemental mastery. If you kind of have used, while you're getting ready to use this Viridescent, and you use an energy recharge weapon instead of an elemental mastery weapon, you could do a 2-piece of any of the EM sets as well, to just help out more with personal elemental mastery needs that Kazuha kind of has. So besides that though, I do say once again, stick with Viridescent all the way. For main stats, when we're actually looking at this though, I do think obviously going full-blown elemental mastery is going to be the best, and probably the only way really when running Kazuha. Obviously, we already know trying to just get more and more elemental mastery is going to buff your other characters, so it's the best way to go. For substats, for your feather and your flower, look for a high amount of elemental mastery. For your sands, your goblet, and your circlet, look for energy recharge, and, kind of the extra crit and attack percent can be nice, but once again, you don't really care to crit. Attack percent is probably a little bit higher than that so that you can make sure to do a little bit more personal damage with Kazuha, but crit's kind of pretty low. Energy recharge is at the top behind elemental mastery for substats, if you can get them. Obviously, if the main stat is elemental mastery, you can't get elemental mastery in a substat, but still, that's the major way you should be going when looking at him as a character. Now, looking a little bit further, I did talk about at the beginning how great his constellations are, and I do think that his first few are extremely goated and some of the best and desired constellations. Now, the first one's not that great actually, but the second one I think is one of the most desired constellations in the entire game. Now, looking at his first constellation, it states that it decreases the skill's cooldown by 10 seconds, and using his burst resets the cooldown of the skill. What that means is more consistent usages from the skill, but majorly that second part is basically saying you can use skill, then use a burst, and then immediately use your skill again. It allows for more damage, as well as possibly, if you want, to pick up a different element to help with multiple different elemental damage buffs that you can get. That can also work as well. I have definitely been able to pick up more, different types of elemental damage bonuses. I've been able to pick up Hydro and Pyro because of this, actually. Because of the C1, it allows me to pick up different elements over time on different senses, which allows for more buffs for the entire team, because if you have Pyro characters and Hydro characters, you can allow them to do more damage altogether. Now, once again, that second constellation is one of his best, and this is why. The Autumn Whirlwind field created by his burst has the following effects. So that huge field that you basically create with the burst, it increases Kazuha's own elemental mastery by 200 for its duration. So Kazuha, as long as that field is going to be up, then Kazuha will make sure to get 200 elemental mastery no matter what. So as long as the duration's going, Kazuha is going to get 200 elemental mastery. But as long as you're within the field, then the character that is going to be basically all the other characters, if you're standing in it, let's say if I did a burst and then I switched over to Arlecchino, she would also get 200 elemental mastery as well. But as soon as she steps outside of the field that Kazuha has created, I lose 200 elemental mastery. So make sure to stay, when you're with other characters, make sure to stay within the field a little bit longer. And everybody only cares usually about this extra 200 elemental mastery to other characters, which, don't get me wrong, it is very good. But keep in mind, this extra 200 elemental mastery that Kazuha is giving to himself is further buffing him even more for this passive talent, which is giving him more EM, which obviously is giving more damage bonus to other characters. So by triggering this burst, basically, you're not only helping other characters' elemental mastery to allow more higher vaporize hits and all these other things, you're helping another character, Kazuha. He's helping himself buff characters even more. So he's helping himself to help other characters. Once again, just another reason why this constellation is so great. The C3 increases the level of the skill by 3, and then the C5 increases the level of the burst by 3. The C4 states that when Kazuha's energy is lower than 45, he obtains the following effects. Pressing or holding the skill generates 3 or 4 energy for Kazuha respectively. If you press, it's 3. If you hold, it's 4. And then while gliding, Kazuha regenerates 2 energy per second. This could kind of just be useful as you're, I guess, for the C4, if you're just immediately running around. And as you're getting ready to go to the next boss or something in the overworld, if you're just gliding, you can see that just kind of slowly gives him more energy. And I guess for certain bosses that are in the world, this is kind of helpful. And if you are gliding towards an enemy as well, this could help get some more extra energy instead of doing the Madara Ranzan plunge. If you're a little bit low on the burst and you want to make sure to give that all your characters the extra elemental mastery for the burst, that could allow your extra energy needs to help out a little bit more as you glide closer to the boss as well. But looking a little bit further into that final constellation, the C6, this allows Kazuha to be on field and actually kind of become a quote-unquote Animo DPS for a little bit. After using the skill or burst, Kazuha gains an Animo infusion for 5 seconds, and additionally, each point of elemental mastery will increase the damage dealt by Kazuha's normal charged and plunging attacks by 0.2%. And there's no cap on that either, and that's just probably because the extra 200 you get from the C2, as well as all the elemental mastery you can give, you probably don't need a cap, just because it's kind of difficult to get more than that. It's probably very difficult to get over 1300 elemental mastery just by Kazuha alone, so getting to that's pretty difficult, but honestly, still a very good constellation. I don't think that getting to the C6 means that you have to change your build, though, just because more or less you're still getting from the 2-piece of Viridescent, you're still helping personal Animo damage bonus. If you want to, you could switch to a different set that maybe helps a little bit more, or 2-piece attack, 2-piece Animo damage bonus, or something like that. Sure, you could, but I do believe that the 4-piece Viridescent is still very good because it's helping other characters, as well as the 2-piece is helping Kazuha still with personal damage. And then other characters, you might just change your team around where it might help, because even still, all of this means that you still need to go full-blown into Elemental Mastery, because each point of that Elemental Mastery is going to spike your damage up that you're going to be doing with that Animo infusion. So still, Elemental Mastery is still the way to go from C0 to C5, which is very nice to know, because usually over time you might have to change a build if you get more constellations on the character, but thankfully Kazuha stays the same. In terms of teams with Kazuha, I think it's almost endless. Once again, as long as you are using any Pyro, Cryo, Electro, Hydro characters with him, he's going to be helpful because he can swirl their element, give them an elemental damage bonus buff, as well as decrease the opponent's resistance to the element that he swirled for those characters. So no matter who it is, whether it's Ayaka, whether it's Arlecchino, or whether it's Raiden, whether it's Yaemiko, whether it's Neuvillette, Farina, Hu Tao, Yoimiya, any element of these DPS characters, or even the DPS characters that you don't see here that you could use for him, he's useful to any of those 4 elements. So as long as they are Pyro, Cryo, Hydro, or Electro, he will be helping them do more damage. Now, that being said, there are definitely some better teams that he could probably be on. Obviously, some freeze teams are extremely good because he can give that huge buff to them. Vaporized teams, it's very nice because that field allows him to, once again, put, let's say, a Xilonen burst on top of a Kazuha burst, which then creates a double field of basically a huge field of Hydro that's constantly hitting Hydro. Yelan's constantly hitting with her burst, Hydro from off field. And with Bennett down, then obviously Arlecchino's normal attacks will always be making sure to vaporize, which she already kind of does anyways, but still allowing that field to help with those characters even more. And even with characters like Hu Tao or Yoimiya, it's the same thing. Now, characters like Kazuha have helped out characters like Raiden in the past kind of be one of the best characters in the game. One of the best teams that you saw or could see back in the day was Raiden, Yaemiko, Kazuha, and Bennett, purely because of the extra buff that, once again, if you have 2 characters that are of the same element in a team, then characters like that are going to be extremely good because you're swirling the element that basically for Raiden, let's say, you're swirling Electro, But because Yaimiko is doing damage, or even Fischl or something like that's doing damage off field, you're also helping them as well because they're now getting a huge damage buff as well. So Kazuha can help out more than just the DPS sometimes. And once again, if he swirls another element of a different character, they could also be doing more damage as well. And Kazuha already has a pretty good stronghold on damage that he does anyways. So it's very good to see that he's just very useful all across the spectrum. Once again, the only teams that you probably won't be able to run him in are going to be Dendro specific teams, probably obviously Geo and Animo teams. The only way that he could really work in a aggravate team possibly in this kind of sense is if you took off kind of this idea and just ran a few of these characters a little bit differently. And you could technically run Kazuha in this mix because catching is the damage dealer. And although she's doing aggravate damage, you can still swirl Electro. So as long as the damage dealer once again can be swirled and allow her to do more damage, that's going to be helpful. But besides that, he doesn't really fit into Dendro teams outside of aggravate teams. So Sino, catching, Chloron, he'll work well with. But besides that, you know, obviously characters like Nahida or even Nilou Bloom teams, you're not really being much of a help until you have the C2 to give more EM. But besides that, you're not helping damage for those Bloom cores because it's Dendro damage. So once again, Dendro teams, not really that great unless it's aggravate. Stay away from Geo and Animo teams. Besides that, he's pretty good everywhere else, which is why he's such a great character.
Teamwork is as one with wind and cloud. Here comes the catch. Transfixed. Witness my rise. Busted. Let's light it up. I'm going in. Into the wind. These are about to get set. Strike a pose. Time to shine.
Fallen leaves. Adorn! Seems like an emergency. Be sanctified. Settle. Time to go. A bitter pill to swallow. Let the mighty be humble. Bow your head.
Time to shine. Take your true form. Cryoing as one with wind and cloud. Kamisato out. Sumetsu. My apologies. May I present? Take flight. Do your master's bidding. Stop. My apologies. Embrace the ice. Let the world come alive.
One with nature. Fallen leaves. Adorn my night. The wind knows me.
Transfigure. My will embodied. My ordinance divine. Sakura swirl. Illusion shattered. Strike.
Set clouds high. The birds.
Going in. No turning back! Inazuma shines eternal! There is no escape! Teamwork is dreamwork!
As one with wind and cloud.
Quiver!
Wind strike.
Horn to oblivion! Glory to the Shogun! Yeah! Everybody stand! Now you shall perish!
Well, that's everything I've got talking about Kazuha. If you guys did like the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe, and let me know down in the comments if you guys actually did like the video. And obviously in the future, if you guys are looking forward to building him similarly, differently, do you guys have his weapon? Do you guys kind of run him actually in a different team? What constellation do you guys have him at? Are you lucky enough to have him at C2? Are you pulling him right now? Did you just get him recently? Are you going after the C2? Whatever it is, please let me know down in the comments. I'd be extremely interested to see what's going on with you guys as well. Thank you again for watching the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.